My name is Chloe Carter. I'm 29 years old, a senior fashion editor at one of Chicago's most prestigious lifestyle magazines. I was born into the Carter family, a name that echoes across skylines, real estate empires, and charity galas. I was raised to embody grace, power, and the polished perfection that my family demanded at any cost. But tonight, as I stand on the stage at the grand ballroom of the Westbridge Hotel at the 50th anniversary celebration of Carter and Miles, the company my family built, I realize I was never chosen to shine. I was chosen to fall. I'm standing here in a crimson gown, deliberately chosen to defy my mother's strict instructions to wear something humble. My fingers tighten around the microphone as the spotlight circles toward me. This is the moment they never saw coming, the moment when their perfectly staged narrative will shatter. The room is silent, waiting for me to deliver the polite, carefully crafted speech I was told to recite. But I didn't come here to read their script. 6 months ago, I wasn't this woman. 6 months ago, I was still foolish enough to believe I could exist outside their control. I tried to build something of my own, a boutique that specialized in sustainable fashion and independent designers. It was my chance to prove that I was more than the Carter name. But my family didn't want me to succeed. Success would mean freedom. Freedom would mean they couldn't control me. And so, when the boutique crumbled under a fabricated scandal, when my business partner vanished with the company's funds, my family seized the moment. They stripped me of everything: my apartment, my position, my financial independence, and offered me a single way out: a marriage to Dylan Brooks. Dylan Brooks, a man they handpicked for me, a nobody in their eyes, a man of modest means who, they believed, would humble me, shrink me, and quietly bury me in a life of insignificance. They called it redemption. I knew it was punishment. They told me I had two choices: marry Dylan or walk away from the family with nothing. No money, no reputation, no future. They expected me to surrender, to wear my failure like a scarlet letter. What they didn't expect was that I would choose to marry Dylan not because I had given up, but because I had decided to fight. Because sometimes, when you are pushed to the edge, you find a part of yourself you never knew existed. And tonight, I stand here, not as the daughter they tried to erase, but as the woman who is about to rewrite the story they forced upon me. They chose me to fall, but they forgot I'm the one who decides whether I stay down. They chose me to fall, but falling wasn't the end. They never imagined I'd use the ground as a place to rise. When I first met Dylan Brooks, I expected to see the desperation of a man clinging to his only shot at social elevation. Instead, he greeted me with an unsettling calm, his handshake neither too firm nor too limp, his gaze direct but unreadable. He wore an off-the-rack suit that fit decently enough and drove a used sedan that matched my family's carefully orchestrated humiliation. There was no spark, no awkward charm, just a quiet transaction waiting to happen. Our first dinner was held at a modest Italian restaurant, one my mother had specifically selected for its appropriate humility. Dylan ordered lasagna. I ordered silence. He wasn't interested in small talk, and neither was I. I resented his calm acceptance of this arrangement, his refusal to even pretend there might be something more. To me, he was another prison guard, smiling as he locked the door. "You know this isn't personal," he said after a long stretch of wordless chewing. "Of course it is," I snapped. "It's my life." He didn't flinch. "It's not personal for me. I'm here because your family asked. You're here because you have no choice. It's a practical agreement." I hated the practicality of it. I hated his indifference, his refusal to offer me even the courtesy of a lie. I wanted him to beg for my affection, to chase the idea of marrying into the Carter name. Instead, he sat across from me like a man fulfilling a contract, nothing more. But I wasn't ready to surrender. There had to be a way out, someone who still cared. That's when I called Mark. Mark Hughes wasn't just my ex-boyfriend, he was the man I thought I'd marry. We had built our dreams together during our years at university, shared plans of launching businesses, conquering industries, traveling the world. We had parted ways when our careers pulled us in opposite directions, but he had always left the door open, or so I believed. When I explained the forced marriage to Dylan, Mark's reaction was immediate outrage. "They can't do that to you," he said, his hands tightening around his whiskey glass. "You're Chloe Carter. You deserve better." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. "We could fix this," he continued, leaning in. "Your parents always liked me. If we presented this as a rekindled relationship, they might accept it. I have leverage now. I'm CFO at Lexington Holdings. They'd see the strategic value." Strategic value. It echoed in my mind like a warning bell. His eyes didn't hold affection. They calculated. He wasn't reaching for me. He was reaching for what I represented. The Carter name, the connections, the power. I excused myself under the pretense of taking a call and walked out of that bar with the crushing clarity that Mark didn't love me. He loved what I could restore to him. There was no rescue waiting. When the wedding day arrived, it was nothing like the grand vision my mother had once painted for me when I was a teenager. The crystal chandeliers, the designer gown flown in from Paris, the society pages dedicating full spreads to our family's social triumph. Instead, it was a small, subdued ceremony held at St. Alden's Church, a quiet building in the older part of the city, far removed from the glittering venues my family usually frequented. My mother selected the simplest ivory dress, one that fit a little too tightly at the waist, a silent punishment disguised as frugality. "You look acceptable," she said, fastening a modest pearl necklace around my throat as if it were a chain. "Remember to smile. People will talk if you don't." I smiled. Not for the photographs, but for the quiet knowledge that this was not the end. It couldn't be. My father walked me down the aisle with the stiffness of a man escorting a reluctant employee to her termination meeting. Our family's closest friends sat in tidy rows, exchanging sympathetic glances as if mourning a loss, which, in many ways, they were. I was no longer Chloe Carter, the shining daughter with limitless potential. I was the cautionary tale. Dylan waited at the altar, hands clasped calmly in front of him. He offered me a small nod as if to say, "Let's get this over with." And I hated him a little for that. The reception was barely more than a lunch. The gifts were practical, the conversations stilted. No one lingered, no one toasted. It was a transaction, completed and filed away. After the wedding, we moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a building my family's company had conveniently forgotten they owned. The furniture was bland, the walls painted a sterile white, and the kitchen faucet leaked persistently, a quiet reminder of how far I had fallen. My job, if I could call it that, was an entry-level administrative role at one of the smallest Carter & Miles satellite offices. I fetched coffee, filed invoices, and endured the smug satisfaction of supervisors who relished assigning menial tasks to the fallen daughter of the empire. It was a precise and calculated demotion, but while they celebrated my downfall, they forgot one thing: I was still standing. They celebrated my downfall, but they forgot one thing: I was still standing. And I had started to watch. It began with the weekends. Every Saturday morning, without fail, Dylan would disappear. He never offered explanations, and I never asked, at least, not at first. I told myself I didn't care, that whatever he did was irrelevant to me. But as the weeks stretched on, his absence gnawed at me like a loose thread begging to be pulled. His routine was too precise to be accidental. He always left early, often before sunrise, carrying the same battered leather briefcase, dressed in quiet, unassuming suits. When I asked where he was going, he'd respond with vague answers: meetings, errands, nothing important. But everything about Dylan had begun to feel like a question that no one was supposed to ask. The tipping point came on a rainy Sunday afternoon. He returned home later than usual, his shoes damp, his jacket clinging to him like it had absorbed secrets. As he removed his watch, I noticed something that didn't belong: a subtle but distinctive engraving on the back: DC Holdings, Dominion Capital. It was impossible. Dominion Capital was a private equity powerhouse. a global investment firm so exclusive, so secretive, that even the financial world whispered about its elusive CEO. I had spent years as a fashion editor, hearing the rumors at industry galas that the man behind Dominion was invisible, untouchable, his identity shielded by layers of corporations and legal smoke. Yet there it was, on Dylan's watch. That night, I waited until he fell asleep. I crept into his home office, a room that had always been locked, but this time, he had forgotten to reset the deadbolt. Inside, the world shifted. 3 wide monitors glowed with real-time market data. Sophisticated financial modeling software ran complex algorithms across multiple screens. A Bloomfield terminal blinked in the corner, a machine that cost more than my entire annual salary. Files were stacked neatly, labeled with acquisition targets I recognized from news headlines. Dylan Brooks, the man my family had selected as my punishment, was orchestrating billion-dollar deals from a modest apartment in a forgotten building. I rifled through drawers, scanned the documents, piecing together fragments that didn't make sense until they did. Offshore accounts, high-level corporate correspondence, confidential investment portfolios. I stumbled across a thin folder buried beneath a stack of quarterly reports. My name was on the tab. Inside, I found transaction records tied to the boutique I had once owned. Embedded among them were donations from the Carter Foundation to shell charities that funneled money to my former business partner, the woman who had stolen from me. Payments aligned perfectly with the timeline of my boutique's collapse. The realization hit me like a gut punch. Someone in my family had not only watched me fail, they had paid to ensure I would. I barely heard Dylan enter the room. "You went through my files," he said, his voice unreadable. "You let me believe you were just convenient," I hissed. "Who are you?" His gaze didn't waver. "I'm the man your family thought they could control." "Don't lie to me." He sighed, then walked past me and opened a hidden drawer beneath his desk. He retrieved a worn financial magazine and laid it flat on the desk between us. On the cover, Dominion Capital's legendary growth. Across the top, the ghost CEO who controls Dominion. He tapped the cover. "I do." I shook my head in disbelief. "That's impossible. I built Dominion from the ground up," he continued, his voice level. "I kept my identity hidden to protect what I built, to see who wanted me for me and who wanted me for what I had. So, this marriage. Was I just a corporate investigation?" "Originally, yes. When your family's lawyer approached me with this arrangement, I knew I'd finally have direct access to the Carters. I wanted to see how your family operated behind closed doors before I made certain business decisions." My stomach twisted. "You used me." His jaw tightened. "No more than they did." I wanted to scream, to slap him, to rewind time and stop all of it. But something in his voice forced me to pause. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't cruel. He was simply telling the truth. "And what did you find?" I asked, my voice shaking. "That you were never the enemy. You were their target." He walked to the desk and pulled up another file on his screen. Financial trails, emails, meeting notes, all pointing to one person. "Your mother orchestrated your boutique's failure," he said quietly. "Your father knew and approved it. They needed to destroy your independence. They needed you to believe you couldn't succeed without them." I staggered back, the weight of it suffocating. "I've known for months," Dylan admitted. "But I didn't tell you because you weren't ready to hear it. You needed to find your own footing first. You needed to stand. I don't need your protection," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "No," he agreed, his eyes steady. "You need the truth." And as much as I wanted to deny it, I realized that in this twisted, orchestrated marriage, the only person who had truly seen me was the man they chose to bury me with. The truth was no longer a distant shadow. It was here, undeniable, burning in front of me, and I couldn't unsee it. The man I had been forced to marry, the man I believed was my punishment, had become the only person willing to hand me the key to my own cage, and I wasn't going to waste it. I want to expose them. I told Dylan the next morning, my voice steady for the first time in months, publicly, completely. I want them to feel what it's like to have the ground ripped out from under them. Dylan regarded me carefully, as if weighing whether I truly understood the war I was asking to start. Once this begins, Chloe, there's no going back. They will fight. They will discredit you. They will tear you apart if they can. Then we fight smarter. For the first time, I saw the faintest hint of a smile tug at his mouth. Then let's get to work. We spent the next 6 months building a war machine. Dylan transformed our bland apartment into a makeshift intelligence hub. Charts covered the walls, spreadsheets sprawled across the dining table, and whiteboards filled with names, timelines, and financial trails became our daily landscape. He taught me to read bank statements like crime scenes, to trace money as precisely as a forensic scientist. I learned to dissect contracts, to anticipate corporate smokescreens, to recognize when influence was bought and where it left fingerprints. I had always been raised to present an image. Dylan was teaching me how to see past one, but it wasn't just spreadsheets and strategy. He pushed me to build my mental endurance. He simulated confrontation scenarios, drilling me on how to hold my composure when they inevitably tried to gaslight me, to dismiss me as emotional, unstable, or bitter. You can't fight rage with rage, he said as I stumbled through one of our mock confrontations. You fight it with facts, calm, precision. You need to be the sharpest person in the room. I began to understand him, not just his methods, but his mind. He wasn't cold. He was deliberate. His silence wasn't distance. It was discipline. In the process, something unexpected happened. I stopped seeing Dylan as the man chosen to break me. I started seeing him as a partner. Still, we needed more. We needed someone inside. That's when I reached out to Lucas, my younger brother. Lucas had always been the quiet one, the overlooked son. My parents called him the insurance policy for the family business, but they never really trusted him with power. He'd been trained for the Carter Empire, but treated like a backup plan. I found him alone in his apartment one evening, surrounded by architecture sketches he never showed our parents' designs. He'd been told were childish distractions from his real responsibilities. When I told him what I had discovered about Mom and Dad, I expected disbelief, maybe even betrayal. Instead, Lucas lowered his gaze and said quietly, I know. I froze. You what I've suspected for years, that they manipulate everything. I just never thought they would destroy you to prove a point. His voice cracked slightly when he admitted it. I tried to warn you, he continued, but Mom intercepts everything, your calls, your messages, even your friends. She's been isolating you for a long time. Chloe, I overheard her telling Dad that you needed to be corrected before you embarrassed the family any further. It was worse than I had imagined. Lucas offered to help us. He still had access to key internal files, contract approvals, and the private email chains that documented the Carter Foundation's connections to my former partner, the woman who had been the final blow to my boutique. Quietly, carefully, Lucas passed us pieces of the puzzle. His courage wasn't loud, but it was relentless. Through him, I discovered that my mother had gone as far as blacklisting me with corporate partners, systematically ensuring that no one would hire me after my failure. It wasn't just sabotage, it was exile. Piece by piece, we built the timeline, the money, the emails, the shell companies, the backdoor negotiations. Dylan's team at Dominion Capital, operating discreetly from the outside, verified each connection. We had everything. And then, as if the universe wanted to make our choice clear, the invitation arrived, a gold-embossed card, the Carter and Miles 50th Anniversary Gala, attendance expected, family remarks required, the perfect stage, the perfect audience. I stared at the card for a long moment before looking up at Dylan. It has to be there. That's where I tell them, where I tell everyone. He nodded. Then that's where it ends. But I shook my head slowly. No. That's where it begins. It wouldn't begin until I stepped into that ballroom. And when I did, I was no longer the daughter they expected to stand quietly at the corner of their perfect family portrait. Dylan and I arrived deliberately late to the Carter and Miles' 50th anniversary gala. The moment we entered the grand ballroom of the Astoria Hotel, conversations stalled, champagne glasses froze midair, and every pair of eyes locked onto us. Dylan was no longer the man in department store suits. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo, tailored to perfection, subtle yet unmistakably expensive. I walked beside him in a striking emerald gown that defied my mother's strict orders to wear soft, muted tones. The color shimmered under the chandeliers, unapologetically vivid, a statement they couldn't ignore. My mother, Evelyn Carter, spotted us instantly. Her smile flickered for the briefest second before she mastered herself. She approached with my father, Leonard, steady at her side, the weight of their public image pressing down on every step. "Chloe," she greeted coolly, her voice honeyed with practiced warmth. What a bold choice of color. Quite unexpected. "Thank you," I said smoothly, offering no apology. It felt right. My father's gaze lingered on Dylan. His sharp eyes took in the new cut of the suit, the handcrafted watch that subtly peeked beneath his cuff. A flicker of suspicion passed over him. "You must be doing well," he said with a thin smile. I hadn't realized the family business paid so handsomely. Dylan's reply was casual, but every word landed with deliberate weight. "Actually, I've moved on to more suitable opportunities." Before my father could probe further, my mother steered us toward the reception line. "You'll want to circulate, dear. People will expect to see you behaving appropriately." As she drifted away, Dylan leaned in. "She's activated the inner circle. Brace yourself." Like clockwork, the family's closest social allies descended upon us. Eleanor Whitmore, my mother's most loyal confidant, approached first, dripping in diamonds, her lips curling in manufactured sympathy. "Chloe, darling, how brave you are to come tonight," she cooed, eyes glinting with condescension. "And Dylan, how you've elevated your presentation since we last met. Isn't it wonderful how marriage refines people?" I met her gaze evenly. Marriage has certainly been enlightening. Dylan's taught me to distinguish between what shines and what truly holds value. We moved through the crowd with precision. Dylan introduced me to associates no one in the Carter circle recognized because they weren't from my family's world. They were Dominion's top executives, discreetly positioned throughout the room. Their subtle deference toward Dylan didn't go unnoticed. I could feel the confusion spreading, like a ripple in still water. And then I saw her Claire Jennings, the former partner who had vanished with my boutique's funds. She stood beside my mother, laughing, entirely too comfortable. Of course, my mother had invited her. I crossed the room with Dylan at my side, cutting through the manufactured politeness like a blade. "Claire," I said, my tone sharp and cold. "What a surprise! I thought you preferred to disappear when things became complicated." Claire faltered. I heard you had stepped away from fashion." "Temporarily," I said, my smile thin as glass. "Though I've been quite busy investigating financial irregularities in the industry. It's remarkable what comes to light when you dig deep enough." My mother's voice slid in like a dagger. "Chloe, this is neither the time nor the place." "Oh, but I think it's the perfect time." I walked away, leaving them to stew in the growing tension. As the orchestra softened, the toasts began. Leonard's longtime business partner led the speeches, his words laced with praise for the Carter family's unwavering commitment to integrity, excellence, and loyalty. I felt Dylan's hand steady against the small of my back. When it was my mother's turn, she delivered her speech with immaculate poise, carefully threading her narrative of family unity and perseverance through hardship. And then, as planned, she invited me to the stage. It was supposed to be a brief, graceful acknowledgement of their magnanimity in allowing me to return. A final performance. I took the microphone and faced the crowd, the people who had once turned their backs on me without question. "Tonight," We celebrate 50 years of Carter and Miles, a legacy built, as we've heard, on family values and impeccable ethics. I know those values well. They were used to discipline me, to correct me, to teach me where I supposedly belonged. I paused, scanning the room, watching my mother's expression begin to strain. But what happens when those values are wielded as weapons, when family uses power not to uplift, but to destroy? I nodded to Dylan. Instantly, the ballroom's screens lit up. Banking records, email threads, contracts, all linked the Carter Foundation to Claire Jennings' fraudulent shell companies. The room gasped, whispers spiraled. I walked them through every carefully timed payment, every forged document, every step of the trap that had been set for me. And the man they selected to humble me, I gestured toward Dylan. Allow me to properly introduce my husband, Dylan Brooks, CEO of Dominion Capital. Silence cracked, then shattered into stunned murmurs as Dylan's identity settled across the room like a bomb. My mother tried to stand, her face pale. This is slander. Lucas's voice cut through the noise as he rose from his seat. No, it's the truth, and I won't be part of covering it up. He crossed the room, deliberately standing beside me, the quiet brother, the forgotten son. My father's chest heaved as he clutched the table, but no one rushed to him. No one was fooled anymore. Dylan and I left the stage together, our steps slow, measured, deliberate. We walked away from the dynasty they had tried to bury us under. Behind us, the empire trembled, and the truth stood unshaken. The empire trembled behind us, but I didn't look back. I had spent too many years standing in the shadows of structures built to contain me. Now, I was walking towards something I had built for myself. In the weeks that followed, the Carter family's polished facade collapsed like glass under a slow, deliberate hammer. Industry regulators descended on Carter and Miles, peeling back the layers of influence and quiet corruption that had gone unchecked for decades. My parents scrambled to contain the fallout, but they were unprepared for the sudden withdrawal of allies who now saw them as liabilities. Former friends, board members, and business partners distanced themselves, some quietly, others publicly. Eleanor Whitmore, my mother's most trusted confidant, issued a statement of deep disappointment and announced her resignation from all Carter-affiliated charities. The Carter name, once a key to every door, became something people whispered about in lobbies and hallways, an artifact too risky to display. I watched it all unfold, not with triumph, but with a strange, settled quiet. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about justice. It was about stepping out of the frame they had built for me. Dylan and I moved out of the apartment where our arrangement had begun a space that had always been a holding cell, masquerading as a home. Our new place overlooked the river, a soft current always in view, as if the city itself was gently reminding us to keep moving forward. We built something real this time. The boutique was reborn under a new name, Clara Atelier, a brand centered on emerging designers, sustainable materials, and transparent supply chains. No silent investors, no family influence. Dylan provided the seed funding as a formal investment, subject to the same scrutiny and performance expectations as any of his other ventures. I wouldn't have accepted it any other way. It wasn't charity. It wasn't redemption. It was belief. Clara Atelier quickly found its audience. Designers who had been overlooked, clients who valued substance over spectacle, colleagues who cared more about craft than power. And for the first time, I found something resembling peace. Lucas, too, stepped beyond the roles our parents had scripted for him. With Dylan's help, he secured his place in a respected film production company in Los Angeles, where his architectural sketches found new life as set designs. For the first time, he was building something on his own terms, and his voice over the phone carried a kind of lightness I'd never heard before. We kept our distance from our parents, not out of bitterness, but out of choice. Contact became infrequent, pared down to neutral exchanges that maintained polite distance without pretending we were something we weren't. There was one final invitation I hadn't expected. A formal letter, embossed with the Carter family seal, arrived on a rainy Wednesday morning. A proposal for reconciliation. The terms were cold, transactional, a list of conditions, appearances, joint statements. It was a contract that asked me to resume my place in the family in exchange for carefully crafted silence. I read the letter once, then I folded it neatly and set it aside, untouched, unanswered. Some bridges aren't meant to be crossed again. Some names don't need reclaiming. Dylan and I planned our second wedding without fanfare. No press, no spectacle, no list of guests selected for social advantage. Just 20 people on a modest yacht, anchored in still waters under an open sky. Lucas stood by my side, this time as my brother by choice, not by obligation. I wore a simple gown, one I'd designed myself, stitched by a designer I had once mentored. No diamonds, no borrowed family heirlooms, just an honest beginning. Dylan slipped a meteorite band onto my finger, and when I met his gaze, there was no transaction between us, no arrangement, only the quiet certainty that we had chosen each other freely, fully. The man I had once been forced to marry had become the partner I would have chosen all along. Our life moved forward in quiet rhythms. The boutique grew, one deliberate step at a time. Dylan's business empire thrived, but the man himself preferred simple routines, cooking, morning walks, evenings spent tracing constellations we didn't always know the names of. The Carter family continued their carefully controlled appearances, salvaging what they could from a story that had unraveled in front of their closest allies. But I was no longer part of that narrative. They could revise it, polish it, rewrite it, but they couldn't reclaim me. I had nothing left to prove to them. I had stopped measuring my worth by the proximity to their approval. I had stopped asking to be seen. I became someone who built quietly, loved deliberately, and chose who I let into my life. My circle was smaller, but it was solid. It was mine. 1 year after the gala that fractured my family's story, I stood outside the boutique just before opening, the city's morning pulse beginning to rise around me. The windows reflected the person I had become, not perfect, not untouchable, but whole. I reached for the door and stepped inside. The weight of their expectations didn't follow me. The need for their validation no longer lingered. Some stories aren't about winning. They're about walking away. Some victories aren't loud. They're steady. Some truths don't need permission to exist. My worth had never belonged to them. My dignity was never theirs to take.